Okay, it's now 11 o'clock. So we'll open the meeting. First thing I would like to do is congratulate Representative Wallner, who has a new grandchild. You want to tell us about him? To address us.
Sure. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Michael Kane. I'm the Legislative Budget Assistant. I'll be 2 seconds. As you know, Steve Smith in our office, our Audit Director, retired in the middle of July. So on August 1st, with the approval of the Chair of Fiscal Committee, Representative Weiler, we have promoted Christine Young as the new Audit Director. Christine's been with our office 29 plus years in the financial division. She's well liked by everyone in our office as well as the agencies she's worked with. So I just want to introduce you to Christine. I didn't want to send a group email. I know you get a lot of emails, so I thought I'd do it in person. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Is she here? Hi, Christine. Welcome. We look forward to working with you more closely.
Likewise. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Mike. First on our agenda, because we have a quorum, and today we have Representative Edwards appointed for today to replace Representative Earth, who could not be here.
Move to approve as written presented?
Minutes of, okay, but,
But I would second
so
its staff.
moved by Senator Lang, seconded by Representative Weiler, the minutes of April, discussion, Representative Weber.
Working. Oh, they aren't working now. Sorry. I'm just operator malfunction, apparently. The vote on the chair, it says on a motion by Representative Earth, seconded by Senator Whitley, that Senator Rosenwald be elected chair. It did not note that there was a vote on that, and I believe there was. So, motion adopted following that sentence, I think would be helpful.
Thank you. Okay. Any other corrections, amendments, discussion? Can we do a show of hands? All in favor of it adopting the minutes with that one change? Okay. Abstain, one abstention. Number 2 is we need a vice chair.
I would nominate Representative Jerry Griffin.
Representative Weiler has nominated Representative Griffin, and that's seconded by Senator Lang. Discussion.
He's an active member of the Finance Committee and the CPA.
Is he willing? He's willing.
And he's willing.
Any other nominations? In that case, we'll cast one vote for Representative Griffin. Congratulations. Okay, now number 3 is status of ongoing performance audits. Jay and Christine. Welcome. Does the committee have questions? I guess not. Um, could he come sit at the table in case there are questions? Does anyone on the committee have questions about the scope statement? Senator Whitley?
No, I just wanted, if you wanted to get his perspective on the summary of things on the call.
Good morning. For the record, my name is John Clinch. I'm a senior audit manager with the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant. I can give you a summary of the scope statement if you'd like. According to RSA 354A:1, that prohibits discrimination. The Commission of Human Rights was founded to eliminate and prevent discrimination in employment, in places of public accommodation, and in housing accommodations. The Commission is tasked with receiving, investigating, and making findings upon upon complaints alleging violations of discrimination laws. The Commission consists of 7 voting members appointed by the Governor with the consent of Executive Council. And as of May 2023, the Commission staff consisted of an Executive Director, Assistant Director, 5 investigators, intake coordinator, a paralegal, and a secretary. What gave rise to this audit was the Judiciary Committee found that there was a large backlog of cases. As of June 8th, 2023, there's a backload of 260 cases, with the oldest case filed in January of 2022. A case is considered to be in the backlog if a complaint had been received but not assigned to an investigator. Let's see. The previous LPAOC proposed the following scope statement, and it was presented to the Fiscal Committee. And that is the Commission for Human Rights efficiently and effectively enforcing laws against discrimination when receiving, investigating, and making findings on the complaints? Fiscal Committee approved that scope statement, and we present it here today for your consideration. To address the question, we reviewed relevant laws and statutes. We interviewed commission members, got some perspectives of stakeholders, and we will plan to review case files and survey complainants and respondents to the surveys. The audit period will be state fiscal year 2020 through 23, and we anticipate the audit will be completed in March of 2024. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Representative Weber and then Weiler.
Just out of curiosity, I understand that the definition of backlog is simply the cases that have not yet been assigned to an investigator. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many cases are actually in the pipeline that have been started but have not come to conclusion yet? Do we know that?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Okay. Just
Rep Weiler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things I think we'd be looking for is how can we reduce the backlog and the time? A year seems very excessive. And I know you'll look at other states and see what they have and perhaps the federal government and see if we're worse than them, better than them. They might all have a big backlog, but if the problem is we don't have enough people, then that's something we'd like to read about and maybe do something about to correct, because I think a year and a 200-something backlog is excessive. Thank you.
Yes, the budget item.
Representative Griffin. Do you have a sense of how long we'll take to bring on board those 4 new investigators? We're basically doubling the size of the investigative team,
Yeah,
but it's going to be a while, right?
right. I would imagine.
Well, following up on Representative Weiler's question, is there some national standard of caseload that these 4 investigators might allow us to get to? Representative Edwards.
Thank you. As I recall, the way they are set up and the way they work their cases is they make a case determination, and I forget what the categories are, but let's just say for this that the categories range from being validated and action needs to be taken to something that didn't indicate to have merit. And so I would be curious if the audit would be looking also at, over the course of time, the nature of the cases as they're being adjudicated, and to see if there's any kind of a correlation between the amount of time it's taking to get cases done relative to whether or not whether or not they have merit or not, and just to see if we're backlogging our system with not frivolous but cases that may not have should not have been brought. But so.
There we go. One of the difficulties we have is the commission doesn't have a database of cases, so we're going to have to go in and use, look at file reviews by hand. They don't have anything automated that we can get statistics out of. So that limits how long we can look back into the past. We anticipate we'll be able to describe that for one of the fiscal years, probably state fiscal year 23. But to go further back than that would be difficult. And I think the categories you were looking for were probable cause and no probable cause. That's one of the intermediary decisions that the commission makes. You're welcome.
Any other questions, Senator Whitley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on that On that same note, it's actually surprising to hear that they don't have a database to sort of track outcomes. And so perhaps that could be an area that you look at in terms of comparison to other states. And certainly I see that as impacting their efficiency if they're not sort of tracking their management processes. Thank you.
Representative Weiler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So another thing that occurs to me, without a database, you might have the same person bringing in complaints every other year about the same sort of thing. And, you know, so it becomes kind of just their game, if you will, trying to get some other additional thing they want. But especially if they're going from job to job and become a chronic complainer, I think that ought to be pointed out. Anyway, we may encounter that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Representative Senator Lane.
I move to approve the scope of work.
Seconded by Representative Weber. Any further discussion? Can we do this by a show of hands? Okay. Unanimous. All right, item number 4 is the tabled, suspended, and potential audit topics. Mr. Henry and Ms. Jones.
Okay. With this, we'll start with the Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services. That audit was suspended in November 2021 due to a pending legal proceeding, and there's no update on that. Next is the public access to bodies of water audit topic. That was tabled. It was decided not to move forward with that audit as there might be another committee responsible for that topic. So that was tabled. Then we have the Secretary of State's Archives and Records. This one, it was tabled because it was unclear if the LBA had the authority in statute to conduct a performance audit here. The LBA Audit Division Statute, RSA 14:31A, Section D, excludes constitutional officers in the execution of their constitutional duties from a performance audit. We asked Senate Research for the definition of constitutional officers and constitutional duties, and to identify which duties, if any, are possibly auditable. According to Senate Research, which was provided in your handouts there, there's no definition of constitutional officers or constitutional duties in the New Hampshire statutes. So without those definitions, it still remains unclear if we have the authority to perform this audit.
Senator Whitley.
On. There we go. I wanted to address that issue. I took a look at that memo, and I think it is true that the statute is ambiguous as to whether there's coverage, but I do think there's a strong argument to be made that the legislature does have authority to review the office. I think it's correct that the Secretary of State's office or the officer is created by the Constitution, but all of their duties are not there's no duty defined in our Constitution. All of the duties are defined in state statute, which the legislature, of course, is responsible for. And I think if you look at, there were some Supreme Court cases that Senate Research identified, and it's pretty clear that that part is very clear, that the Secretary of State's duties shall be those of both legislative branch as well as the executive branch. So I think there's a very strong argument that even though the actual person, Secretary of State, is a constitutional officer, the office itself and the duties are statutory by nature, and therefore we do have authority to audit.
Representative Weiler.
Well, I think the audit function is so important that we ought to change the law. If anybody on this committee would like to proceed with a suggested legislation, I would be happy to co-sponsor, because a few years ago, when most of us were still here, we tried to audit the Supreme Court or the court system. It was a 2-year battle. It should not have been. It should be clear that wherever we send money, we should be able to audit them. And so when someone says, oh, no, you don't have the authority, I'm thinking, all right, we're going to give ourselves the authority, because the audit is too important to let somebody skate. Thank you.
Representative Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my position is, doesn't go quite as far as Representative Weiler's, but I do share his sentiment about we need to have accountability. I think I perceive a difference between the Secretary of State's office, which is, as Senator Whitley says, partially legislative and partially executive in nature. It is not a separate branch of government. The judiciary is a separate branch. Right. And I think my suggestion, and I will say that when you put up your hand, I had just written the word need filing ? But I wonder if we could perhaps start with the smaller bite of the apple and get that taken care of, and then think about a broader application. But I would be more than glad to talk to you about that if you would care to do that.
When it gets my attitude, like Representative Weiler's, is we fund them program by program, line by line. It's very different from, so the motion is to remove potential audit topic of the Secretary of State Archives and Records off the table. Motion by Senator. All in favor?
I'm going to just put one wrinkle into this topic. So it's the constitutional officer, and I think we'd probably agree the Secretary of State is a constitutional officer. And then the constitutional duty, that's where we sort of go, which are those? And with the Secretary of State, in the Constitution, Article 68 talks about the records of the state shall be kept in the office of the Secretary. I mean, it says it's duty of the Secretary, so I don't know if that's, archives of the records. As far as if someone was going to say that's one place we shouldn't go, because that seems like the strongest case of the Constitution is calling it a duty. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just throwing it out to you. I think if probably better is if our statute was clarified, would probably is the real fix.
But RSA 5C is the vital records statute. And it's given by us to the Secretary of State's office. Rep. Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a thought on this is that to the extent that there are jail car rules that govern the record keeping, I would think those would be auditable. And I would go further and say to the extent that the Secretary of State's office has developed standard operating procedures or protocols on how they say they want to administer their records, I would think that those would be auditable without causing a constitutional issue.
Is there a motion from Senator Lang?
Sure. Move to approve the scope of work.
Okay, so I think the motion is to continue an audit. By Senator Lang, seconded by Senator Pearl. Further discussion, Representative Weiler.
If a legislation is filed in September, which will come up in January, at what time span are you going to be doing this?
It depends how many topics you give us. It also depends if you have a priority, if you want something done before something else. We do have the freedom accounts that will have to start sometime after, I think, October. this year. So, we do have, we'd like to have a list of audits to do, and then we can also look at who we have ready to do the audits, how many people we have. So, but if you have something you want done first.
Well,
last,
if
we can follow that.
you feel more confident if we have legislation that describes that these duties are, then when you go ahead, there can't be that roadblock. So if you're not starting till February or March or April,
Right.
then hopefully the legislation will be in place.
Representative Weber.
I think the issue here is either we have the authority to do it now, or it is a constitutional duty, and the only way we're going to get it to stop being a constitutional duty is by amending the Constitution. So I think we need to think about that. My vote would be to go ahead and try it and see where we get. But if, there could be a court case and the justices could say this is a constitutional duty, in which case the only remedy is amending the Constitution. It is not, the Constitution cannot be overridden by a statute, and that's black letter law. So
I disagree.
Okay. Did you have your microphone on?
I had it on.
Is there further discussion? We have a motion to proceed with an audit.
that's already right in the pipeline, and it's just waiting for a determination of who may be.
But the law, what you said was effective October.
Changes in play and get an opportunity for them to kind of work through it and see how they're going to. Apparently I spoke too long.
Department was undergoing a transition and had some turnover in their office.
The back of the table, if not the front
I'm sorry.
of the table.
Little about it, that I'm wondering, how many contracts, how many different agencies and so on, how many different agencies and so on and so forth. The piece you have
Yes, Senator Lang.
Turn me off again.
given us answers virtually all of my questions and so forth. The piece you have given
Yes, Senator Lang.
Turn me off again.
Out of public health for a public awareness campaign, or if it is a contract with some of our homeless and housing providers, those will fall under our IT related contracts as well would also be captured within that category. And that's distinct
And so I believe in 2021, we gave you a significant, that
me and is doing an absolutely fantastic job. Based on those needs.
has, solved those issues, and whether we still see this problem.
An amount of resources towards improving that process. And we've continued to measure the time that it takes to develop an RFP to get to contract. We implemented a lean
Metrics around time to do contracts. And I know but you're silent on that. And I think that's been one of your major sales points is that what other sort of needs might you anticipate an audit would find? You've reduced time.
Upon the way the contract's been written and the way the contract staff have been, the program staff who are identified and are working on now are in the commissioners defining the goals of the contract earlier this year. So I think what Robert's identified is that we want to work meeting those goals. So that's another area we're working on.
Senator Whitley.
I think based on that was very helpful, understanding how your office is interplaying with the contracting office. Maybe this is something
Much more complex. So, it's not a one size fits all process, and figuring out, I think starting by taking the obvious low hanging fruit of if we have things that are being generated online, typed, scanned, retyped, re-entered into a spreadsheet, surely we can get to the point where somehow we can eliminate all of those steps. And I'm glad you're looking at it. Thank you.
Representative Weiler.
Yeah, some of us are hoping to make a meeting.
Okay. Next, BDS. BDS.
I'd just like,
I think Mr. Henry can arrange this to happen in February, but if he, at least he has on, he's also looking to us for a list of what he wants to move on next. So I would rather have it on his list with that timing recommended. Thank you.
Representative Weber, and then I'll get to you.
And I respectfully disagree. I think it's too soon to put it on because I don't think we have a clear idea of what exactly it is we want to look at. And I would be happier keeping it on the table and addressing it again at the next meeting when we have a little more idea what's going on. It seems to me that we have already a certain amount of stuff in the pipeline. You probably need more. But I think, perhaps having another meeting in the not too distant future, in the fall when we have more of our members around and thinking about these things, to see if we can generate more of a list. But it sounds to me that you actually have a fair amount on your plate.
two new ones, Freedom Accounts coming up, and then the archives
Right,
that are on our list right now.
right.
And that, I mean,
Not going to be finished until next year. So you have a lot to be going on with, was my sense.
Senator Lang.
Thank you. I also think we just leave this as a potential audit topic for now. And mainly the reason being is I'm a little concerned we're talking about all the changes they're making, and audits are retrospective. They look backwards, and yet they're going to be looking at something that's no longer actually happening because we've made a whole bunch of changes. So I'm a little concerned about doing an audit now. It's just a waste of state effort. And we should probably keep it in our mind, but take a look at their progress on what the changes are.
I agree, and I think we should see what the effect of the Medicaid rate increases are, because maybe some of those consumer complaints will be resolved by a better workforce. I mean, a more robust workforce. Senator Whitley.
Yeah, not only, I would agree, not only the increases, but we also have another bill to sort of tide over our providers in the DD system, or our families in the DD system. And while this change is going on, we're allowing them to raise their budgets. And so I think some of those, so I think in that meantime, that's going to help. In terms of new topics, Representative Weber just mentioned the incident where two of our children were placed in a very inappropriate, non-therapeutic facility in Tennessee. And what comes to mind to me in that issue is this sort of interplay between DCYF and Children's Behavioral Health. They work together a lot now, but they are very separate agencies, and they are dealing with the same children. And as we're building the Children's Behavioral Health system, the whole idea is that we'll have less families that are involved with DCYF, but right now we have a lot in both. We have a lot of families in both systems and a lot of children that are in both systems. And so, I mean, I think it is pretty problematic that any child from New Hampshire did end up in this facility. Regardless of whether they were placed by DCYF or Children's Behavioral Health, I think exploring how that happened is important. But I think it's a larger question of how these systems fit together and whether there's a need for more system integration with our children's health system. So that's something that I would be really interested in learning more about. And also accompanied with that is that folks on the Finance Committee know very well that the Children's Behavioral Health budget is very high. And it's high because we are at this point, we're in the middle of system change. And also we are seeing more children in the Medicaid system because what I understand from the Children's Behavioral Health Bureau is that private insurance is not covering what is necessary. So they're pushing these high need children into the Medicaid system. That's another issue that I would be very interested in seeing whether, the dramatic increase of children in that system is happening because our private insurance aren't doing what they need to do.
Senator Lang.
So I guess given all this conversation on these last two items, I guess what I'd be looking for is given all the conversation, what's the scope of work look like? What are we actually looking to do here? And maybe develop a scope of work that we can vote on and look at for a future audit. But I think everyone agrees that right now is probably not the time while they're making all these changes.
You mean on the Bureau of Developmental Services or on DCYF versus behavioral health?
Thank you. The last two items we just discussed, the contract management piece as well as the behavioral health, right? I think we've both just, we've had a conversation about, I think, what a scope of work might look like to make potential look at and to see what we could for corrective actions. But I think we've also discussed and said that neither one of them are ready for prime time right now. And so having a scope of work to look at exactly what we're going to be auditing and what we're going to be looking for that performance audit, similar to what we just saw for the human rights scope of work we voted on. If we could see that, that would be helpful and allow us moving forward and give us time for them to adapt the scope of work for our discussion.
Representative Weber.
Well, now I have two things, if I might. The first, before I forget it, was in response to Senator Whitley. And while I am as interested as she is in the explosion of developmental services, that sounds to me more like a study committee than a performance audit, because you're talking about what's happening with private industry. So that might be a way of dealing with that particular issue. I think we have a procedural issue with Senator Lang's suggestion, because we vote the audit and then the scope statement is created. So, and I think the scope statement isn't created until after the audit has also gone to fiscal. Is that not correct? Doesn't the audit have to be approved not only by us, but by fiscal before you start with a scope statement?
Yes, that's right.
So we can't just say, oh, please scope something. That's a procedure that's, I think it's our job to narrow down a little more what we want people to look at before, and when we have something that's a little more specific, then we can go forward with it. But I think for me, the comment about audits are backward looking, and when we have a system in transition, taking a backward look at what we were doing wrong before we did something different isn't very helpful. What we need to do is wait and find out if what we're doing differently is effective or not.
Representative Edwards.
I'll keep it short because we do have noon upon us, but just specifically on the housing practices, subparagraph 2 here, I think this one's a little bit more cooked than the other ones, because as I understand what this one wants to be is a review of the demands for housing situations within BDS and the available stock that we have in state. And when we don't have available stock in state, we're outplacing people in other states at a tremendously high expense. And so what I think that performance audit would want to look at is whether or not we're making a good business decision on our investment levels of housing stock for BDS due to the negative costs of having to refer people out of state. That's what I think that performance audit wants to be predominantly.
Representative Weber and then Senator Whitley.
And again, that sounds an awful lot like a study committee to me more than a performance audit.
Senator Whitley.
And I believe we might be conflating two issues. I think the people that are going out of the state are children in the DCYF behavioral health system, not adults with disabilities or children with disabilities. I'm not aware of adults or children with disabilities being sent out of state.
Well, I think there are. There are.
Perhaps if there's a dual diagnosis, but our DD system is much more, we're decades in advance in terms of the provision of community-based services. And so we just don't see a lot of those folks being pushed out of state. Where in the children's system, we have a lot of children being placed out of state. I don't know.
Okay, well, the House has to go to another meeting. So we're going to have to wrap this up. I think at the next meeting, we'll talk more about what we could do with BDS. And I would just throw out one other idea just for everyone to think about as a potential topic, and that is the doorways, which we've had for 7, 8 years, $50+ million, and we've never taken a look at how effective they are. So just to think about. Any final thoughts?
Could we ask for that to be put on the list so that those of us who allow our brains to empty during the summer are reminded of it? Because I think that that's a very good suggestion also.
Anything further? Then if not, is there any other business?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, the next meeting will be at the call of the chair based on Mr. Henry.